As amateur philosophers and concerned citizens, how do we begin to bring society back towards standing on principles instead of allowing our collective morals to wither away? As a clerk for an election bureau of a heavily contested suburban county in a key swing state, I've been exposed to shameless abuse of election laws, almost to the point of outright fraud. The most disheartening thing to see is that despite the election workers having good intentions, when presented with the choice to stand against a questionable ballot and methods of gathering absentee votes with solid legal footing, the path of least resistance is taken to avoid conflict, and swaths of votes are allowed. As a simple cog in a vast and rotting machine, where do I begin? That's from John.
No, hey, John. Do you want to say any of the stuff that you've seen? Obviously, keep your privacy as tight as possible, but is there anything you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely, Stefan. Just to say it's an honor to be on the program. Thank you so much for having me. I hope I can contribute in some small way to the conversation you guys have had, and I've learned some.
Contribute in a huge way. Why not?
Wonderful.
Aim big.
So a little bit about me before we jump into it. I'm 22 years old. I'm a student. I work at for the Bureau of Elections. It's my 9 to 5. I'm a night student. This is my first presidential election, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm not that intelligent. I'm just doing my best because through FDR, through your program, I've really gotten so involved and I've been so interested in these national level politics. And no one is having the conversation about these absentee voting statutes and laws, and where they're being abused and how they're being abused. And I think that maybe I could help shed some light on it.
I appreciate you doing that. And I'll let you, I don't even know the questions to ask. So feel free to just give us your thoughts and what you've seen.
Okay, great. So there's two big points we'll start off with. So from state to state, there's different absentee voting laws. So Pennsylvania has different laws than Ohio than Florida. So one of the only unifying things across the different states is something called the federal postcard application. So if I'm an overseas voter who, well, let me start there. So the federal postcard application counts as your voter registration, as well as it entitles you to an official ballot. So you can be Joe from Germany who has never voted in an American election before. You lived in the United States for a couple of weeks when you were born, and then your parents moved you to Germany, and you've never lived here before. So I could file an FPCA into this election through the registered address of your parents that you lived here for a week when you were born, and you would now be entitled to vote in this election right now. There is no ID requirement on that. So right now, you could file that application, sign your name, sign your parents' registered address from when they were here, and you would be registered and entitled to an official ballot. Now, I don't know how no one talks about this because Pennsylvania doesn't do early voting, but this absentee voting, we're going to process in my county alone almost 20,000 votes for this election. And that puts it, I would say, pretty comfortably within the margin of being able to swing my county at least from one side to the other because it's that closely contested.
And again, there's no paperwork required. You just
Well, there is paperwork required. So
I mean, sorry, ID or formal stuff.
Exactly. The only ID requirement, there's no ID requirement for that because you're a federal voter. It's easy to get lost in the wording of this, but if you go to fvap.gov, you can read all this for yourself. So I know it sounds a little crazy, but spend 10 minutes and go read all about this for yourself. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not even that intelligent, but this is something I was shocked to read about. You can have never contributed a cent of tax money in your life. You could have lived overseas for the entirety of your life, and because your parents were natural born citizens and you were born into that, you're entitled to vote in a federal election.
Right. Well, yeah, the idea that you'd have to pay taxes to vote would be really startling to people, but that's kind of how it used to be a long time ago. And the idea being, of course, that if you didn't pay taxes, you would simply vote to take tax money from those who did through the government. And that's, of course, how it used to be. Well, hasn't been that way for many, many years. So So that's not necessarily an abusive election law. It's just an odd election law that could have significant ramifications and doesn't have a lot of checks and balances as far as filtering out legitimate from illegitimate voters. And by that, I don't mean legally legitimate. I mean just people who actually have a stake and who pay taxes and who understand on the ground what's going on.
Right. It's an old, clunky law that doesn't fit anymore. I mean, it was initially for, 30, 40 years ago where, people still had postcards. People still did that stuff. So it's literally called the federal postcard application. So it's so outdated that it should be irrelevant. It should have been re-engineered. And right, it's not abuse, it's not illegal, but my God, it's how can that still be the law?
Right, and George Soros has spent a lot of money trying to get people registered in that way, right? And there are illegal immigrants going door to door, campaigning for Hillary and all that. I mean, there's a lot of very, to me at least, logically fishy stuff that's going on.
Right, of course. So to go to, well, I started on the innocent stuff, so now let's start working our way deeper into the rabbit hole. So this is where I start thinking that, I mean, this is abuse. So nursing homes are so they're drilled and they're mined for votes. So as a social worker in a nursing home, you have access to all these poor people who don't have the capacity to really think or defend themselves anymore. These social workers, the activists, will go to these nursing homes. They'll have conversations with the people living there, and they'll send applications for absentee ballots in. The ballots will be photocopied, so the writing will all be the same. We'll get a packet full of 100 votes from us from the same building, and it'll be the same handwriting across almost all of them, except for the signatures at the bottom.
Huh.
So these poor people, I mean, we've had kids of parents who've been in homes who've called in and say, hey, my mother's not voting in this election, is she? Because, she's not capable and we were worried about it. So we'll go to check on their parents' status, and sure enough, they'll have votes registered.
Huh. So people go in and register them and then basically put their hand on the paper and say, sign this, it's very important. And they're like, okay, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, I'm sure that's what Jefferson intended. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, it's almost 3/4 of the ballots that come in that way are just, they're almost all registered Democrats. So I obviously don't get to see the votes, but until voting time, but I can see that they're registered Democrats, and if you can infer from that what you will.
Oh, I'm inferring. Thank you very much, and I am inferring what I think everyone will. All right. Please take away my hope in the process. What else, John? Go ahead.
All right. So today, just today, because of between Project Veritas and other things that have come out in places like the Donald and other at Poll even, I got 5 phone calls today from people asking me if I knew the relationship between George Soros and the voting machines that my county has, which was shocking to me. Now, I mean, I'm a guy who's existed in alt-right circles, and I keep my ear to the ground, and I've been in part of these conversations, and it's a weird position for me to be in because I'm not allowed to have that conversation. I can't say, hey, I agree with you, but I have to try to defend this system where, yeah, I mean, some of these machines are 13 years old. So I have a 13-year-old machine that weighs like 85 pounds to lug it around, and it's runs on systems that are essentially floppy disks. So the votes exist on functionally floppy disks, which is insane. A 13-year-old
still more secure than Hillary's server. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, I mean, so just for a little information about the machines, and there's 4 different voting systems in Pennsylvania alone, 4 different independent electronic voting systems. So the system that I'm familiar with is called the Danahern system. It's DANAHERN. So it's a closed loop system. You basically punch your vote in, it gets saved on floppy disk, and then we punch it into the computers at the end of the night. So it's a closed system. It's not online. So it's secure in that sense, but the software that gets put onto the computer, I mean, that gets pulled down from the manufacturer of the actual machine. So we don't know what goes into that. We have no control. We're not programmers. And we just, at the end of the night, we have to trust what goes onto our report when we put the floppy disk in.
Right. Well, and I've seen those little videos on Twitter of people trying to select a Republican, and the only checkbox that they can select is a Democrat. Say, oh, it's a calibration error. It's like, this election's been coming for 4 years. There's one job that these touch screens have to do. Have you not got around to calibrating them over the last 4 years? Because that seems like that's the whole point.
Well, I mean, yeah, I can appreciate how horrifying that looks. But I got to say, like I said, 13-year-old machines. The most common error with these is power failure. So, I mean, for the wrong light to light up, I mean, it's a small miracle that the lights, they're lighting up in the first place.
It's like the space shuttle where they had to load these modules because the code had been written so long ago and they didn't have enough memory in the computer, and they had to load these things. I mean, man, I used to get pissed off when Galaga went out of power when I was trying to get a high score as a kid. This just seems slightly more important. Can they update these machines? Because my understanding is, John, that there's a lot of companies that have donated to Hillary Clinton's campaign that are very, very keen to provide voting machines as well, which seems to me, as an amateur outsider, just a little bit of a conflict of interest, but seems to be quite a common situation.
Well, to take a step away from it and just to think from their standpoint, how much business can a company that manufactures voting machine possibly do? I mean, how many clients can they possibly have at the end of the day? Uh-huh. So the system that I work on, Danaher, is a competitor of the Dominion voting systems that was linked to George Soros through the different sellings and stock and all that. So, I mean, the company that we bought from isn't directly implicated in that leak, but there's 3 manufacturers of repute that do these. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we'll probably end up buying one from Dominion at some point.
Right. What else have you seen? Tell me tales of skullduggery and immolation of freedoms.
So every application for an absentee, you have to file an application for an absentee ballot as a domestic voter. So as a domestic voter in Pennsylvania, you are required to show ID. So different from the overseas voters, which have no ID obligation, you have an ID obligation in Pennsylvania as a domestic voter. So when we see the different IDs, you can submit a pay stub as an ID. So you could get away with all kinds of nonsense. We get student IDs that aren't government issue. We get people's paychecks that can satisfy the requirement. So if in the Project Veritas link, I think it was video 2, the guys when they were trying to catch them going along with the scheme, that's exactly what they said. We'll hire them for a week to a Pennsylvania address, and then that'll be their pay stub, and that'll satisfy the ID requirement for them to vote in that state.
And I've never quite understood, why is it? Do you have to complete some sort of weird Lara Croft style quest with headless monkeys and blood drinking bats to get a government ID? Because that just seems to be one of these things like, okay, well, I have to have a government ID to drive a car. I have to have a government ID up here to get healthcare. I have to have a government ID for XY to buy alcohol or whatever. Why is it so impossible for people to get government IDs, or that you just want these kind of loopholes to remain?
I don't know. I thought it was hilarious that you have to have a government ID to walk in the building that you would vote from. To walk into the Bureau of Elections building, you have to have an ID. So, yeah, I agree with you there. So also a requirement of the application for an absentee ballot is a reason for absence. So I know it's awful of me, but when I see someone who put on their application that they were born in 1916 and that they said they had a stroke, but they're going on vacation to Disney as the reason for absence, I can't help but wonder if that's legitimate.
I can't help but wonder if that's legitimate. You have a very, very positive way of phrasing things, John. Very, very careful, very cautious.
I may not be the smartest guy, but I'm doing my best here.
Well, 1916 to 2016 is not exactly functions and relations or vector calculus. That's 100 years old. Going to Disney World. Well, it's possible, but I wouldn't put a lot of money on it.
So, at the end of the day, I think what's where the broad strokes of bad votes, in quotations, because you can't pin this on anything. There's no smoking gun. There's no fraud to be proven. But at the end of the day, there's 10 people in this office who are processing 20,000 applications for absentee ballots, and then the ballots. So at the end of the day, for this election cycle, we'll touch 35,000 documents that we'll need to process. And that's going 10 ways. And you have to, like, every single form has to have eyes on it. Every single form has to be run against the state system. So if you're willing to accept 99% accuracy for every form that comes in, how many get through?
Yeah.
And that's in a perfect scenario. And with that being said, the office I work in, they're conservative, hardworking people with very good morals. I mean, they're good people. This is about the perfect situation. I mean, I can't say that every office is going to be as upstanding and virtuous as the office I work in.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there just seem to be so many opportunities for problems to arise. I mean, is the hanging chads? I remember that being a big thing in 2000. Is the hanging chad still I mean, I guess you're a young guy and all, but you must hear tales from the wizard people in the back. But has that sort of punch stuff been more or less taken care of?
In my experience has only been with these electronic systems.
All right.
And
okay.
so I can't speak to it.
Right.
One other thing I think is relevant that needs to be brought up in this conversation is the role of third-party organizations in bringing these applications to us, and also bringing the voter registration documents to that office. So I'm a student right now. So as a student right now, when I walk onto campus, standing in the parking lot is a guy prompting me to get my vote in, to register to vote and to vote. There's so many activist organizations out there that are trying to collect these votes and these registrations, which is it's a good initiative. It's it's important to exercise the vote, right? But where it starts getting fishy is when people are targeted, like the overseas voters. So there's organizations that will canvass addresses in Pennsylvania, and then they will have listed addresses online. So if I was the Joe from Germany earlier, that I just as an example, and I didn't have an address in Pennsylvania, and I said, "Oh, I used to live in this neighborhood," these organizations are linking people with addresses to register from in Pennsylvania. So there's people who own a home, are paying all their taxes, and there could be more than one family registered out of their address because somebody gave them that address to register from. Huh. So despite owning the property, they don't have to have any link to it.
Right. Well, and if I were of a nefarious bent of mind, John, and I was on a college campus and I was trying to encourage people to register to vote, I got to tell you, I think 9 times out of 10, I could pick the conservative and I could pick the Democrat without even asking. There's a look, there's a feel, I mean, not a lot of Republicans have blue hair and those weird kind of Nina Hagen outfits and weird black lipstick and coffins for purses, all the stuff that's like every day is Halloween because I just had a really dysfunctional childhood that I haven't dealt with, so I'm going to take it out on the world through my outfits. And you can see the males, they always seem to have these like high foreheads and these broad black rimmed glasses and I don't know, that's just a kind of slinky, skinny, no waist, no hips kind of outfit and bendiness, like they're all like Gumbies of spinelessness. I think you can just go and find them. It's like they have this aura of high T women and low T men just kind of floating around, all the R selected people out there. I don't think they're impossible to find. So if I did want to get a bunch of students to vote and I was, say, a Democrat, it might not be completely impossible to get a slight edge of Democrat-leaning people to end up voting. Even if you just picked women rather than men, assuming that these still can be told apart in modern campuses, if you just chose women rather than men, you would automatically be giving a huge boost because, only married women are pro-Trump for the most part, and very few married women on campus, particularly with blue hair. So You just pick the, I don't know, the overweight women. You pick the women with particular hairstyles. You pick the women in very comfortable shoes. You know, whatever it is, and you would very easily find the Democrats, and you could push the needle that way.
I think you have successfully checked off the microaggression checklist there. So yes,
that you know that never ends. I barely scratched the surface, but no, if so, I feel quite proud of myself spontaneously to do that.
So once these get collected, they get submitted into the voter registration and the Bureau of Election offices to get processed. So on these forms, you put the date that you've signed it. You put the date next to your name, obviously. So what these organizations were doing was they were holding on to thousands and thousands and thousands of these registrations, and they dumped them off on the day of the deadline. So you've got the deadline in Pennsylvania was the 11th. So on the 11th, there were almost like 17 or 18,000 new registrations for this election.
Wow.
And then they have to get turned around in the span of almost a week and a half almost. So that puts them in the situation where if there was unscrupulous people who wanted to put bad registrations through, it would get buried in the amount of volume they could put in through the last day.
Right. One last thing I wanted to mention about college. You go up to people and you say, do you know who Foucault and Derrida are? Yes. Okay. I really want to register you. But well, this is important too. And I don't mean to jump out of the details, but the big picture thing, John, that I think about is if you are the gatekeeper for a legitimate vote, if you let an illegitimate vote through, I can't imagine there are really any negative consequences. However, if you oppose a vote or you hold it up or registration or whatever, or you deny somebody their right to vote in the moment, right? You let someone through who maybe shouldn't be there, no negative consequences, right? But if you don't let someone through who really wants to go and vote, well, you could experience some significant negative consequences, either in the moment or thereafter. And so just from that standpoint, you know, like if you were offered $1,000 for every illegitimate vote or voter that you kept out of the building, that might balance things out a little bit. But the way things are set up, the rational calculation, sort of I know the good people and all that, but the rational calculation is, okay, just let people through, because if I stop someone who wants to go in, they'll make a big stink. But if I let someone in who maybe shouldn't be there, what happens? I mean, other than, you know, the end of democracy, which is a bit abstract, you know, when you've got people who want to yell at your face at the moment, does that kind of influence, do you think, things at all? I mean, just this very skewed incentive system?
Oh, absolutely. Because you have to think, we live in such a litigious society that, I mean, anytime you have to get in contact with somebody who didn't clearly write the address, and you send them an email saying, could you please clarify your address on this application? You'll get an angry email back saying, I can't believe you're trying to disenfranchise my vote. It's like, well, let's take a step back here. I mean, you didn't complete the form. We're entirely unable to process you. We're going out of our way to try to ensure your vote. You know, if we wanted to throw it out because you didn't write the thing on there, we'd send you a rejection letter. But our main process,
we're trying to help you vote,
exactly.
Right? You're trying to help this person vote.
Exactly. But, you know, people get so contentious over it for good, I guess, for good reason. So yes.
To
go back to what
not good reason. If you don't know you how to fill out your address, I don't know that you're the very most informed voter around. And if you get angry at someone who says, hey, you didn't fill out your address, you're trying to disenfranchise. Oh, come on. Come on. I mean, I don't know.
The thing to get upset over is making sure you can vote. I mean, misguided, I entirely agree with you. But, you know, there's worse things people get upset about nowadays. But yes, to bring up the big picture stuff you said, our main operating principle is that everything that comes into our office has to be postmarked. Everything that comes into our office has to be filed properly. Because if we do miss that vote and someone was to press it on us, we would be, you know, up the river with no paddle.
So what happens if someone is not in the system or is not registered or whatever, and they show up and they have ID or they really, really want to vote? I mean, do you just turn them away? Do you have security? I mean, how does that work?
It's called a provisional ballot. So it's a paper ballot that you can fill out. Excuse me. It's a paper ballot you'll fill out at the time of the election. It's provisional upon clearing you after the fact. So it's like, we'll record your vote. We'll keep the vote. And if your information clears at the end of this process, because we can't do it immediately, then the vote will count. So it's provisional.
You can have a
clear.
beer. You can't drink it until your mom shows up with your ID. Okay,
Exactly.
got it. All right. Okay. And is there any other ways? I mean, I'm sure there are, but ways that you've sort of seen or know of that things can happen that may not be what people expect might be happening?
The prevailing thought we get a lot of is that these mail-in ballots, they're not counted seriously, or they're counted after the election. So much energy goes into making sure these go through properly. People, election workers all over the country right now are swamped. People are working really hard to get this right. They're working within a flawed system, and they're doing their best. So I would have to say what people don't expect is these election workers are good people that are working really hard. So in their defense, they're working under imperfect situations and doing really well. So I'd have to say in their defense, people don't expect them to be working as well as they are, but they're doing good with what they have.
Yeah, obviously some would be partisan hacks in there too. Maybe swing things one way or the other, but yeah, I mean, it's not the boots on the ground. It's a system that matters as a whole. Do you have a wish list of things that you would love to have different? I mean, obviously more resources, more time, and so on. But how would you change things if you could?
It has to be modernized. The state system that I work with every day, it looks like Windows 98. It has the same gray color scheme and awkward corners on the windows from like Windows 98.
Right.
So that's the system. It's so inefficient. It's so clunky.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Like, I can't even remember how many years ago they dropped support from that because they couldn't guarantee it was going to be secure anymore. But that perhaps is a topic for another time when I have more will to plow through this stuff. But sorry, go on.
No, you're fine. It just, I mean, it would take an entire overhaul of this system because there's been no money pumped into it for so long. Because it's not sexy funding. You know, people don't want to put money into counting votes. It's like infrastructure. People don't want to put the money into it because it doesn't look good on their reports. But
and if you want a system that can be manipulated, why would you want to make it less manipulable?
Right. So I mean, I guess the wish list is this. You know, in modernizing the systems, there would be more security. There would be more assurance in being able to account for these systems. I mean, having a report on the back end of these voting machines where they could maybe pump out a paper ballot, they could pump out a report on command, but there's very little accountability on these machines. And the individual offices, we have no qualifications to touch those things. I mean, we don't know how to really operate them beyond the simple steps. We don't know how to deal with the programming or anything technical with them, really. So, I mean, modernize the system, clean it up, have more accountability in there somewhere, and that would be a huge step.
And ID.
Right. Well, that's voter ID laws, which is a whole big. I mean, that's so far removed from what we deal with. Like, we just have to deal with it. That conversation isn't something we're even allowed to talk about.
Well, I certainly don't want to get you in any trouble, but I do appreciate that view from the ground, and it's not pretty sometimes to see what goes on from behind the scenes, but I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. And of course, if there are any people out there who have good solutions for this kind of stuff, feel free to talk with those around you and see if you can figure out ways to improve these things. But John, I really appreciate your time calling in tonight, and I guess I wish you the best of luck over the next couple of weeks.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, man. Great pleasure.
Well, I will say, John, clearly there is nothing to worry about when it comes to voter fraud, because Barack Obama has assured us that vote rigging and election rigging doesn't happen. Except 8 years ago, he said that elections would get stolen occasionally, especially in Chicago.
Well, Elizabeth Warren, of course, has also told Trump that the system is not rigged after saying that the system was rigged, and Jon Stewart is the one person who could help expose that. So, yeah, it's so boring. Don't you just find this stuff in politics? The reason I'm glad that the election is almost over, I mean, it is tired, A, but B, it's just so boringly predictable. I mean, and particularly, that's what got me so bored about about politics as a whole was it was all just so boringly predictable. You know, when it benefits the Democrats, it's the best thing in the world. When it doesn't benefit the Democrats, it's the worst thing in the world. When it benefits the Republicans, it's a good thing. It's just, you know, these fluid morals, the expediency of the moment, and it just, you could tell what everyone was going to say prior to Trump. You could tell what everyone was going to say before they said it. And I don't like, you know, my daughter can read the same book 20 times, not me.